Those of you who are foolish enough to sit not near the door, that's too bad, you're trapped now. I'm John Langellier, and I'm with my good colleague John Covington. I owe John many favors, so I agreed to do this talk and not embarrass him too much. But this talk, in some respects, comes to us courtesy of the Greater Southern Arizona Area Chapter of the 9th and 10th Horse Cavalry Association, which, thanks to John and his colleagues, have an incredibly fine memorial to the black soldiers in the Southwest, particularly Arizona, here in Southwest in Tucson. So those of you who have some time and are spending some period into this fair city of Phoenix, come down to the real city in Tucson, in Arizona, and visit us there. We have better Mexican food there anyway. My sermon for today is, by the way, a Jesuit trained from Marquette, so I don't have a pulpit that this will have to do. Is about Buffalo soldiers and bands and breaking barriers through baseball also. Kind of the music and baseball were intertwined in many respects, as we'll hopefully see momentarily. But beginning with the Revolutionary War, blacks served both on land in the Continental Army and at sea with the Continental Navy, both as combatants as well as martial music makers. Similarly, during the War of 1812 and nearly a half century later, during the American Civil War, African Americans again rallied to the nation's defense. In the latter conflict, some 189,000 African Americans volunteered for the United States Colored Troops, as they were called, and thousands more entered the U.S. Navy and continued to serve in the Navy, integrated to the crews, because on a sailing ship or even a small steam vessel of the mid-19th century through late 19th century, many of the areas were so small that you could fit the whole crew into this room, and so you couldn't segregate the sailors, except for the captain, of course. Rank has its privileges. He would have his own cabin. Among the primary functions, however, of the troops who served as musicians during the Civil War and even earlier was command and control through drum, fife, and trumpet. During the din of battle, you could actually communicate whether to charge, fix bayonets, or that wonderful call, retreat, run like hell. You would have the ability to communicate in battle. Of course, there were also in these regiments, many of the USCT regiments had regimental bands. And so soon after the Civil War, in 1866, I'm glad you're all sitting down, the U.S. Congress actually did something right. They created, through legislation, 6 segregated regiments of African American soldiers, 2 of cavalry and 4 of infantry. And for the first time in the history of the nation, during peacetime, African Americans were permitted to serve in the U.S. Army. In due course, over the next 25 to 30 years, African American soldiers literally served throughout the United States, west of the Mississippi River, from Texas to Arizona to California, and ultimately by the 1890s would serve in Cuba, the Philippines, and in Alaska. I'm sure one of the favorite postings of all the soldiers, Skagway, Alaska. With them again came the Army bands, both infantry bands, such as seen here, the 24th Infantry Band, and cavalry bands. Cavalry bands had to be precise and good musicians, just as their foot soldier counterparts, but they had one differentiation. They had to be able to play their instruments on horseback. Thus, like Ginger Rogers, she did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards in high heels. These guys had to drop their reins, play their tubas, play their instruments as they rode on horses. Here they are at Fort Huachuca, which is still an active duty military post today. Some of those barracks still stand on the parade ground. And again, these individuals had to guide their horses with their knees and their feet because they're playing their music. Of course, whether mounted or dismounted, these bands appeared in an array of martial functions, usually at places like the parade ground, the center, if you will, plaza or part of any military garrison of the time. They would stand for guard mount. They would be at the bottom of the flagpole, where twice a day old Lori would go up the flagpole and down the flagpole to the tune of the colors. But by 1894, a new song was being played. It was called the Star Spangled Banner. However, it was not the national anthem till the 20th century. They would play at bandstands, usually found again on the parade ground, for the entertainment of the soldiers, their families, and the civilians working on the post or visiting, and sometimes inviting those civilians to the post. Or, in the case of the 9th Cavalry Band in 1880, they would play at the bandstand in the beautiful plaza. This is Santa Fe, New Mexico. That bandstand still stands. The locals would be treated to a free concert with some of the finest musicians that they would have in the area, and they would be invited on a regular basis to attend these concerts in the plaza. The band was well received, and by doing so, by these constant concerts with these extremely well-trained musicians, they began to break down barriers. Familiarity doesn't have to breed contempt. It can bring about genuine understanding, and that was one of the reasons these bands were very important. Indeed, when the band left, packed up and went off into the sunset to the next posting, because usually troops would rotate out every 3 or 4 years from their posts, the 4th Cavalry Band no longer played for the local population, the 4th Cavalry Band being an all-white organization. One young officer would eventually come to another conclusion, but these bands not only would be there for concerts, anytime you had a political event, a patriotic event, the 4th Cavalry, and again, you can see to the left of the screen, the 9th Cavalry Band in Douglas, Arizona, which is just a few hours to the southeast of us, playing on horseback as a patriotic duty. They would play at numerous other situations too. Again, these concerts that they gave wouldn't be John Philip Sousa-like music. We're talking about classical music, opera. We're talking about a wide variety of types of music. And as things evolved, they would play popular tunes of the era. So by the early 20th century, they're playing blues and jazz and ragtime. And so you would want to go to the skating rink, which doesn't sound plausible, but at Fort Huachuca, which is very hot in the summer, I can assure you. You could go to this skating rink, hear the band. You could go to the 4th of July Independence Day celebrations down in one of the downtown areas. Ramsey Canyon, still, if you're a birder, you can see more birds in one day in Ramsey Canyon than you could on your big year in any one spot virtually in the nation. The canyon was an oasis for people to come, for these groups of the bands would break off and become instead of military bands, orchestras playing again the tunes of the time. They would even play at the local movie theater. There was no such thing as a silent movie. Silent movies were always accompanied in any decent-sized theater by a band or an organ or a piano. On Sunday, my French-Canadian grandmother played in the local church, but on Saturday night, she played the organ at the silent movie theater south of Chicago. These bands would look like something you would see with Guy Lombardo at New Year's Eve every day. They would be smart orchestras that would break off. They would be highly sought after as trained musicians, as people who were really embedded into the part of the culture of local communities, whether it be outside of Fort Huachuca or any given post like Fort Riley and all these posts where they were stationed. So this young second lieutenant by the name of Charles Delano Hines said, we're spending all this money on uniforms, we're spending all this money on various things. Why not take the money and have Army bands? They are a great way to bring communities together. They are good public relations, basically, is what he was saying. And if they were good public relations for the Army in general, they were specifically, to my thesis, also some of the most important inroads into breaking down racial barriers between the black soldiers and the communities that surrounded them, consisting of whites, Latinos, and other groups that had not been exposed to black bands. Well, there was also the fact that while the bands were important, baseball, the national pastime, became the huge equalizer that brought diverse groups together. And as we know, they helped open the door of black baseball teams, not only in the military, but in general, in the post-Civil War period forward, when some of the first professional black baseball teams came about to help open the door to a more integrated, familiar, fair society. And so Sarah Tremblay, in her doctoral dissertation on African Americans in baseball, wrote, baseball had a long history in African American cultural life. 19th century community festivals often included a baseball game, and the first all-black professional baseball team formed in the 1860s. From the 1880s onwards, African Americans staged annual Emancipation Days celebrations that intertwine politics, religion, and sports. Emancipation Day organizers frequently scheduled political speeches and inter-community baseball games back to back, ensuring that both activities were well attended. In cities and towns alike, African Americans' commencement ceremonies frequently included a baseball game, as did Juneteenth and 4th of July's commemorations, end of quote. In fact, from the 1860s, as noted, baseball gradually achieved the status as Americans' pastime. Because of its widespread and appeal to the public at large, along with U.S. Armed Forces, where sports boosted morale and fostered teamwork among soldiers. Typically, baseball held top billing among Uncle Sam's fighting force from the late 19th century through World War II, as seen here at Fort Huachuca and beyond. Occasionally, Army bandsmen did accompany the games to provide musical entertainment and, of course, cheer on their comrades, their fellow soldiers. Again, here's a baseball game played in Arizona, and the band will come along, which is, amongst other things, a way to bring the communities together. It's a massive band, a 48-piece band. You're not going to find that in your average place unless it's a big university or other major facility. But this is a facility where there's only a few thousand people in Bisbee, Arizona, and Douglas, Arizona. Notice the incredible cost, 50 cents admission to a game, including a war tax, because this is right after World War II. Now, every regiment in the black units that have come to be known as Buffalo Soldiers today and have been shrunk down to 4 regiments, 2 of cavalry, the 9th and 10th Cavalry, and the 24th and 25th Infantry, either had regimental teams, or as we see here in New Mexico, they would have teams that were by company or by troop. Troops were the name for companies in the cavalry. So this is the troop in New Mexico in the 1890s, complete with their mascot, the dog, I guess to fetch the foul balls. And another team that was a kind of a pickup team with 3 of their officers. The officers usually were the coaches, the managers, etc. But the officers sitting on the bench is none other than a fellow by the name of Benjamin O. Davis, whose son would command the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. But Benjamin O. Davis was the first of 2 African Americans promoted from the ranks to a commission as an officer with the U.S. Army, and ultimately under FDR became the first general officer who was African American in the U.S. Army as a brigadier general. So too the 10th Cavalry would have its teams. Here's the championship team at Fort Riley, where their tossers faced both civilian and military teams, and indeed there were dozens and dozens of teams, as we can see, almost 2 dozen or more teams that played various games, and so the team from the 10th Cavalry M Troop became the top dog in their local World Series, if you will, their World of Fort Riley, which is all the world they had at that time in many cases. The 24th Infantry and the 10th Cavalry had teams, as I mentioned, and I covered to a degree in my book on Buffalo Soldiers in Arizona. The 24th team is seen here at Fort Benning, but arguably of all the 4 regiments teams, the one we're going to concentrate on now is the 25th Infantry's team, formed in 1894. One of their sergeants was given the task of having a team established at beautiful Fort Missoula, Montana, where you think Milwaukee has bad winters. Spend a winter at Fort Missoula and you see why people used to desert by the summertime or spring. But at any rate, Fort Missoula had the first team of the 24th Infantry, and one of its sergeants was tasked to put together this team, Delbert Green. Green is in the front row, second from center there, next to the chap with the catcher's mask. Green's commanding officer, Colonel Andrew Burt, who was much beloved by his troops, indeed had established the team through Burt. And Burt, like all the bands and all the baseball players in these black units, were soldiers first, bandsmen and baseball players second. So Burt here is shown, or Green here is shown to the left on the first bicycle. The Army in the 1890s decided horses were expensive, but there's this new keen thing called a bicycle. And we can put our infantry guys on bicycles with 60 pounds of gear, including all their food, ammunition, their Craig rifles, and go off and use these bicycles as a combat vehicle. Get them into war, stash your bikes, and go into combat as a unit on bicycles. Now you have to understand, these are single gear bicycles. They have tires that if you look at them burst. There are no nice trails like we have in the mountain biking of today. These guys are really butch guys, and some of them have never seen a bicycle in their life. But many of them were athletes, had lived hard lives in the military. You have to understand, the black units had the highest re-enlistment rates in the 19th century of the post-Civil War and the lowest desertion rates. There were some years, including in the Custer's famed 7th Cavalry, that up to 30% of the men in the U.S. Army deserted. Well, for $13 a month, why wouldn't you stay? That's a lot of money. I don't understand. But anyway, Sergeant Green was a soldier's soldier. He was a great athlete, and he continued to operate the club well into the turn of the century. But those soldiers would put aside their bats and bayonets in 1898 to march off to Florida, and all 4 regiments were on the cutting edge of that splendid little war going off to Cuba. Cuba, fortunately, lasted only a short period of time. The soldiers came back for a brief period to the United States, being posted, the team in Colorado in 1899, thinking life is good, until Uncle Sam decided, no, you guys can't play baseball stateside anymore. You're off to the Philippines. And in the Philippines, where the U.S. military will remain through World War II, the soldiers not only served as combat soldiers, but brought baseball to the islands. So while they were in combat, and here we go, this article was from a major, kind of like a USA Today might be, a national newspaper. It was the Leslie's Weekly, and Leslie's Weekly actually published a lengthy article on Delbert Green and his heroism in the field, not only in combat, but in one case, he jumped into a raging river and saved a fellow soldier from drowning. But still, Green continued to play ball, and still Colonel Burt continued to tout his team. Now, Green was a brave soldier, but he was also valiant with promoting the fact that we are equals to anyone. When the Manila newspaper used the term darkies to describe his team, he dressed them down in an op-ed, and immediately the paper apologized and retracted and never used the term again.
Can you go back for a second?
You bet. If I can figure out the technology. Remember, I still use stereo optical.
I love that the 25th Century team challenges any team in the city of Manila to a game of ball for money, marbles, or chalk.
Yes, well,
We need to start doing that.
yes. And we could have, but if we didn't play payers millions of dollars, we could do that.
I'm talking about our league.
Yes. But see,
Money, marbles, or chalk.
Burt loved his team, and he would speak even when he was retired about his soldiers. He felt, and rightly so, they were some of the finest soldiers in the Army of that era. And their officers, by the way, people that have challenged me years ago, or not challenged, but asked the question, well, how about the white officers? Because all the officers are white, with the exception of some of their chaplains and 3 black graduates of West Point, and of course, by the 1890s, the 2 individuals, including our friend Benjamin O. Davis Sr. And some of those officers had a better career than their white counterparts. They may have been looked down upon, But a guy like Black Jack Pershing did pretty well for himself, and another fellow by the name of George Marshall, and yet another fellow who was a protege of Pershing by the name of George Patton did just fine commanding black soldiers. And frankly, if you wanted to go in to a unit that had lifers with you, 30-year men, you went into a black unit, because in white units, a guy might be from Ireland or Germany or whatever, he'd get off maybe to his 3 to 5 years, and maybe he would desert in between. These were professional soldiers. It wasn't a job of work, it was a profession of arms to most of these black soldiers. They had status within not only the black community, but ultimately, again, through baseball, through bands, through their military prowess and bravery in combat. They stood up to the nation as the finest of the soldiers of their era. By the way, chalk will be handed out at the end of the day. 25th gets a little reprieve. They come back from the Philippines to Fort Navarro, Nebraska, and their team continues to be a hot ticket item. And they will play against other U.S. Army teams who are white teams. They will also play against other non-Army teams who were not African American. This was integrated baseball, but not in the way we think of with Jackie Robinson. It was white teams against the black teams, which we'll come back momentarily. And so the 25th Infantry will end up going from Nebraska and go, oh, shucks, we have to go to Honolulu to be for 3 or 5 years as soldiers. What a terrible assignment that must have been. What a heartbreak not to stay out in the middle of the Cornhuskers and the Big Red. And by the way, I got my PhD from Kansas State, so I can't talk about those people who always beat us. But at any rate, they go to Hawaii, and when they're in Hawaii, they begin to really achieve some fame. They will play in parts for 2,000 and 5,000 people at a time. Think about what that number meant. Honolulu is not a very big place at this point. They will not only play in their own stadium, but elsewhere, and again against not only military teams, and there are a lot of military teams. By the way, last night, in order to prepare for this, I watched From Here to Eternity and the Field of Dreams to get ready for this. Here to Eternity had one thing about it that was very important. The regimental boxing team. They had boxing teams, they had baseball, they had basketball. Baseball was the big dog, but they had teams for everything. And there was this competition. There were thousands of troops stationed in Hawaii. The locals would come out and pay that 25 or 50 cents, depending on where you got seats in the bleachers and such, for these games. And we'll come back to the fact that these are some of the first interracial games ever taking place, because they would make headlines. You could literally reconstruct the game and their statistics down to who the umpire was, and sometimes they graded the umpire too, like, why is this schmuck here? Why should we throw this guy out? He should never be on a diamond again type of thing. Or maybe they should change him from behind the plate because he can't see anything. They were brutal to sometimes, that they were absolutely effusive about the teams. The teams they were playing, by the way, not only, as I said, would be the white military teams they were playing, there would be teams consisting of Portuguese, Chinese, and Japanese, including a team that came from Japan that was a traveling team that came down to play in the islands. By this time, Green had long left the 25th Infantry's team, and he would be replaced by other coaches and managers. But this is also the time that not only is the newspapers covering these games from approximately 1913, 1914 through 1917, but they would receive their nickname from the newspaper in about 1916, the Wreckers, because you would get your record wrecked by these guys. They'll pick up a guy who had been stationed in the Philippines with the 9th Cavalry by the name of Wilbur Rogan. Wilbur would transfer, and this was not uncommon for soldiers to transfer from one black unit to another. Oftentimes, as you got a little older, you'd leave a cavalry regiment to go for the life of an infantry regiment for a lot of reasons. One of my colleagues, his great-grandfather was a Buffalo soldier, said his grandfather left the cavalry because he got them piles and he needed to go on to the infantry because riding a horse was too hard for him. So Rogan would transfer from the islands, from one island, the Philippines, to the other islands, and soon, along with the nickname Rickers, Rogan would begin to get the name of an incredible utility player. He had been a catcher in the Philippines. He was a baseman and an outfielder in Hawaii, and ultimately was a pitcher in Hawaii. And the guy was kind of like the black Babe Ruth. He could hit anything out of the park. The guy knew how to put the wood on the spear. And so he became known as Bullet Joe or Bullet Rogan. And so the newspapers used to cover the games profusely. Again, you could find Rogan time after time becoming a local hero. Now, I want to mention that Hawaii, that we think of as a polyglot society and kind of an international crossroads, initially in 1911, the white community in Honolulu told the government they did not want black soldiers serving in Honolulu. A year later, the War Department said, that's very nice, they're coming. And they did come, and ultimately, not only did they come up with a detente, but these guys essentially became their home team, their favorite team. Now the Wreckers would be at Schofield Barracks. Again, that is still extant in the area, and you can go to Shafter or Schofield. Schofield is where, by the way, the Hell to Eternity is filmed. If you go down Barracks Row, you can see machine gun bullets from the strafing from December the 7th still there. The team remained all the way through the beginning of World War I when word came that you guys are getting another transfer. You're going to the border where the Mexican Revolution has finally subsided, but we still need troops to keep the border quiet. And so the 25th Infantry would transfer to Nogales, Arizona, which still today has a group of descendants of the Buffalo soldiers who married into the local community. The front row, second fellow from the front is Rogan. There will be another fellow in the group by the name of Moore, Adobe Moore. Probably got his nickname from the Adobe forts and garrisons along the border of Arizona. They have the gentleman with his back turned to it as he's turning around speaking to one of the players is the white officer who's their manager player, and the young fellow sitting on the bench is their bat boy, who's actually still, as an older gentleman, still had his uniform as their bat boy. That team meant that much to him. He ultimately became a colonel himself. Here's the team at Schofield Barracks, and you can look, that's a fairly decent ballpark. That is someplace where, frankly, when I started going to ball games, was better than some of the places I attended. So when they come to Nogales, Arizona, we have Wilbur Bullet Rogan shows up, now the hero of Hawaii. He's now becoming a star here, and he's now essentially a pitcher batter. Here's the team in Nogales, now with their nickname, the Wreckers. And they get an invitation, and an equivalent of an email arrives. We called them telegrams in the day. And a fellow by the name of Casey Stengel says, hey, I got these guys who are barnstorming, just like the guys from World War I coming out with their bi-wing airplanes and such to barnstorm. And we'd like to take on your team out there. Now, I know you're all, very ingrained into the history of baseball, so you won't be amazed at the fact that they needed these pickup games because they didn't make $1 million contracts. They were going home to the farm in Iowa or going back to the sling hash somewhere off season. So this was a way to pick up money, and they were heading to California for the California League. So Stengel put together a group of pros, both minor and major league guys, and they would do pickup team games all along the way to split the gate. So as early as El Paso, the newspapers started announcing that these guys were heading west. And so Casey, who, by the way, was a good manager, as we know from New York, and also very colorful. He's right. Getting good players is not that hard. Getting them to play together, that's the hard part. Well, he found that out when he hit Arizona, because of the 3-game series, the Wreckers wrecked them. They took 2 out of 3 from the pros. Now, that's kind of unfair, because again, this was a pickup team. You get somebody from Kansas City, somebody from Detroit, somebody from, God forbid, Brooklyn, and they would go out to play a game with these guys who had played together for years and years and years as a team. So in a way, they were not only the home advantage of their own place here in Arizona to play, but they also had the cohesiveness of a team that had played together. And many of these individuals, as we'll see momentarily, not only were great ball players when they played with the 25th. Collins, Level, Fagan, they had great stats. These were exciting games. The newspapers in Nogales essentially said this is the best ball we'll ever see in Arizona. And Casey would go on to fame, of course, but one of the fellows, Walter Dobie Moore, Casey essentially discovered. And that fellow was kind of Casey's first spark to see, these new Negro leagues that are playing out there have some hot guys. Moore will go off to the Negro leagues, along with at least 14 other members of the Wreckers. One of whom, again, was our friend who's transferred from the Philippines, Bullet Joe. Bullet Joe would have an outstanding record in the Negro Leagues, and finally, about 30 years after his death in the 1960s, in the mid-1990s, was admitted to the Hall of Fame. Now, yes, they played football. Here's the African-American football team of the contingent at West Point. They played volleyball. Hell, you're on the beaches of Honolulu and Waikiki. Why not play volleyball? I just spent more on that photograph to buy it last week than I'll make probably for the next 3 books I write, but what the hell. They had great track teams. They amassed numerous trophies. They had basketball teams. Essentially, these were all-around athletes, but as we all can imagine, it was the supreme game, the national game, baseball, that brought them out into the fore, that brought them into the communities where they played against fellow community members through the period of World War II when the military was still integrated, and helped bring about an understanding between the different cultural groups and ethnic groups that ball players, long before Jackie Robinson exchanged his uniform as a U.S. cavalry officer to wear number 42, they had paved the way. They even paved the way for Satchel Paige to exchange his uniform in the big leagues to play a sergeant against counter to Robert Mitchum in a movie called The Wonderful Country, where he plays a Buffalo Soldier sergeant. And so today, when you get down to Warren Park, one of the great old parks still being, the game still being played, or go to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum to have a fantastic experience there, and at the Jazz Museum, and the second best ribs in the country next to the one John Covington makes, you'll find yourself, is this heaven? No, it's Arizona. So I'll quit tooting my own horn for a while. I'll adhere to the famous cry, play ball, and hopefully I haven't struck out, and hopefully you'll pitch me a couple of questions to see if you have any comments, or if they're really bad, I'm near the door, you won't let me out, I know, but I'm going to try it. And there's some of the sources I've used. I'm sorry I only had about a week and a half to prepare this. Next time I'll bore you even longer. Thank you so much.
Great job.
Do we have any questions? Or other than why the hell am I here today? Which is the question we're all asking.
Did you say where Fort Huachuca is? Is that in the Sierra Vista?
Yes, Sierra Vista, right. And please try and visit while you can, because the museum will close in about another year or so. So we won't see all the great exhibits. But it is hallowed ground, the baseball field there and everything. It's an amazing place. And if you are driving there, stop in a place called Bisbee, get off the freeway, And a place called Mi Casa has the best Sonorense, the best Sonoran food in Arizona. Unfortunately, it's smaller than this room, and you have to stand there and be patient, and eventually you'll get a table. So, but thanks, that's a good question. Any others? John, you don't get to ask any questions because you'll throw me a curveball.
I do have some brochures.
Oh, yes, thank you, John.
On the Buffalo Soldier Memorial. It's the only one in the state. So if you like to have a brochure.
Where can we find some of the photos of the players' teams that you had listed?
Oh, God. I'll give you a quick side story and then answer your question. I started this interest in 1968 when I met one of the 5 precocious and really rambunctious sons of the post surgeon at Fort Grant, when a guy by the name of Frederick Remington, who had dropped out of Yale, came to do illustrations of these soldiers and help launch his career. I've been collecting these photos for over 50 years. And I'll eventually either go to the Schomburg in New York or possibly one other institution, which is, if you ever are in San Angelo, Texas, it's one of the most incredibly preserved frontier army posts, and they have an outstanding library and collection, and I'll probably donate them there.
Got it. So write you if we want some pictures.
Right. And as soon as I learn to read, I'll try to. We French Canadians are very slow, you know?
The telegraph goes right to his house.
That's right. I still do take carrier pigeons, but we eat them after they come, so don't expect them back. Pigeonneau is très bon, très bon.
So I noticed in your bio, did I read that right, that you have an archaeology background as well?
My BA and MA are in archaeology and history, and then my 2 PhD programs, one is in American U.S. history, Native Americans, and the second is military history with historical archaeology and historical preservation. I was the historic preservation officer at Presidio San Francisco and I was stationed at Fort Leavenworth.
Right.
Not at the present, but actually at the
So have you done any digs around ball fields or anything like that?
No, I have not. I haven't been on an archaeological site since my hair was a lot more of it and darker, so it's
Okay.
Speaking of Native Americans, what was the presence of or involvement of Native Americans with any of the Buffalo Soldiers or baseball?
And within baseball, absolutely nothing. Although there was the so-called Indian school here that had a team, but in terms of interfacing, that was one of the major reasons why the regiments were stood up in 1866 for the advancement, quote unquote, of the frontier. And so they were the part of the cutting edge of what now PhD types call the pioneer colonialism, which means manifest destiny with the army coming out to put people on reservations. They had mixed reviews with blacks and Native Americans, just as they would have had, as George Custer discovered in June of 1876, mixed reviews with white soldiers too. So, but I have great photographs of some of the troops intermarrying with the Native Americans, particularly at Fort Apache. Interestingly enough, racism works strange ways. White is defined as what people want it to be at a time. So since Arizona was a territory in the 1860s, interracial marriage was forbidden. And so black soldiers could not marry individuals who were white. They could not marry individuals who were Latinas, but they could marry Native Americans. So there are newspaper articles in Nogales when the troops come there saying, amazingly, how many of the Martinezes and the Gonzaleses all of a sudden became Indians, so they could marry the black soldiers. Conversely, when it came time to set up baseball leagues in Arizona at that time, they wanted all American leagues, which meant the black soldiers could be in the leagues and the white civilians, but Mexicanos could not play in the league because they weren't Americans. So racism is a very strange thing. And so between baseball bans and the soldiers' presence in town, and by the way, when they first came to Prescott, Arizona in the 1880s, It was the quietest payday that town had ever seen. The prior unit was a white unit, referred to as the Bloody 14th, and it's not because of their combat record. They'd come in and ruin the town every payday. These guys came into town, many of them were devout Christians, did not drink, and the newspaper literally said, essentially, the bar owners weren't that happy. The people who owned the merchandise stores were, because these guys had been stationed in Texas for 20 years, and they came into town, and this is a drug code, bought ultra dude clothing, because these guys looked like the nines when they showed up in town. They had pride in themselves as soldiers, and pride in themselves as representing the African American community.
As far as the bands go, did any of the bands play during the games?
Yeah, absolutely, and that was one of the great things about it. We're kind of used to having the charge of the organ or whatever nonsense we have, but yeah, they played at the games, and they also played against the University of Arizona, which of course has always had a pretty phenomenal band itself. So bands were part and parcel of the whole entertainment package, absolutely. So you could get a twofer, a band and a ball game. What do you want? A beer and a brat, and you're in heaven, right? I mean, what do you want that's better?
Sans the walk-up songs.
Yes, exactly.
So when did they play the music? When was it? Like
Oh,
between
yeah,
innings or what?
Between innings and before the games, and a lot of times they'd be engaged in downtown, because the park, Warren Park, for instance, is really close. One thing I did point out, and John's been active in this and several others, there's one of the posts that was built as a border for material. We didn't build walls in those days, we had soldiers patrolling the border. And Camp Naco is a post that was built in 1919, 1920, although it had troops dating back essentially to the 1890s. And if you walk down Camp Naco to about a half a mile, not even a half a mile from the post, to the northeast, there's what's left of the ball field there where the soldiers would play. And if you go down the road another half mile and turn to the right, there is one of over 100 mammoth sites, Colombian mammoth sites, a kill site where we still found Clovis points back in the 1950s in archaeology.
There's some efforts now in Naco to
Yeah,
fix up that baseball field.
yeah.
Are you guys part of that? That's great.
I'm their historian.
Yeah.
Great.
And,
Perfect. So then I need to talk to you about having baseball games down there.
I want to have baseball games down there in the worst way, and if I play it, it will be the worst way.
There are 4 African Buffalo Soldier organizations.
Yes.
The Greater Southern Arizona area down in Tucson, the Southwest Buffalo Soldiers in Sierra Vista, Camp Naco, and then the descendants, or the Nogales Legacy, who are the descendants of Buffalo Soldiers. And right now we have a initiative to award the Buffalo Soldiers the Congressional Gold Medal. The Tuskegee Airmen have it, the Montford Black Marines have it, and just recently, I don't know if you guys know about the ladies from the 6888, the Army Postal Battalion. Great story. Tyler Perry just did a movie on them a couple years ago. It's on Netflix. But Major Fannie McClendon just turned 105 in September, and they had a beautiful ceremony for her at the VA just down the street here in August to unveil a plaque for her. So right now, the 4 Buffalo Soldier organizations are trying to get Congress to award the Buffalo Soldiers the Congressional Gold Medal, because all the other great units came out of the Buffalo Soldiers and their respect for the military and their great service. So that's what we're trying to do. One of the QR codes here, I believe this one here about the chapter, if you scan that, it'll take you to the chapter website. Right on the first page is all the information on trying to get the Congressional Gold Medal awarded to Buffalo Soldiers.
All right, thank you.
Again, thank you so much. If you need to get a hold of me, you can always email Gary. I'm on the road. I have a new book coming out on my first posting was at the Presidio San Francisco where the godless communists never attacked during my 7 years there, but anyway, so I'm on the road speaking in a couple of places through April, but shoot something with Gary and I'll get back to you after the new book's out. And I'm hopefully gonna be in Kansas City next month so I can stop by the museum again and have the second best ribs in town, John.
Who is gsec910cav@gmail.com?
That's our website.
Oh, that's your, okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
And you can always get a hold of me through John,
There's John. Okay, great.
because I still owe him money, so I respond.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you guys coming out. We didn't know if anybody would show up. John was gonna be my audience, and I knew I was gonna get heckled, but that was the case.
And they're